There's a hush that falls over Terminal D at 6:45 a.m., that short window before the business travelers unleash a swarm of rolling bags and morning coffee orders. Cassidy Bell stands with one hand resting on Rook's bridle, her boots anchored in the pale sunlight streaming through the glass wall. She's run this security routine 1,000 times, so the rhythm feels more like breathing than thinking. Travelers glance over with the usual curiosity. Most people don't expect to see a horse inside an airport, much less a horse like Rook, coal black with intelligent eyes and a jaw that flexes whenever he's studying someone. The airport PA hums with flight numbers and distant gate changes. Cassidy's focus is on a young family struggling with a stroller near the security checkpoint, but Rook's ears flick to the left, catching something she can't yet sense. Cassidy shifts her stance, following his gaze, but she sees only the blur of ordinary: a businessman retying his shoe, a couple arguing quietly, an older woman fussing over her boarding pass. Then Rook stiffens, his nostrils flaring as he catches a scent that slices through the air like a blade. Cassidy's hand tightens on the lead rope, her other hand brushing against the radio clipped to her belt, her body coiled for whatever comes next. She trusts Rook. She always has, even when his instincts run counter to her logic. The horse plants himself squarely in front of the boarding lane, muscles taut. There's an abrupt whinny, sharp and piercing, that jolts a dozen heads in his direction. The sound draws attention from passengers and staff alike. Cassidy's training screams at her to de-escalate, to avoid a scene, but she knows that ignoring Rook's warning could be a fatal mistake. She tries to spot the threat before it materializes, and then she sees them, a man and a boy, walking side by side but not together. Not really. The man is mid-40s, clean-shaven, expensive coat buttoned up to his neck, moving with that too-smooth confidence that sets off alarms in Cassidy's mind. The boy, maybe 9 or 10, shuffles half a step behind, his face pale, eyes fixed on the floor. Rook doesn't budge as they approach. Instead, he takes a deliberate step forward, blocking the way, his presence like a wall. The man stops, his mouth pulling into a wide, practiced smile. "Is there a problem, officer?" Cassidy holds his gaze, searching for cracks in the veneer. "We're conducting routine screening." "May I see your boarding passes?" The man's hand hesitates. Just a fraction of a second before he produces the tickets from his wallet. The boy says nothing. He just stands there, small hands twisted together, flinching as Rook lowers his massive head to sniff the air near him. Cassidy senses the tension ripple through the crowd, people craning their necks, smartphones poised to record, airport staff ready to intervene. Cassidy keeps her voice calm but firm. "Please follow me to a secondary screening room." The man's smile holds, but Cassidy sees his jaw twitch. "Is this really necessary?" Cassidy's answer is practiced but unwavering. "Your cooperation is appreciated." She gestures, and 2 uniformed TSA officers appear from the periphery, ready to shadow her movements. Rook moves with them, staying between the man and the exit, blocking any attempt to turn back. As they walk, Cassidy glances down at the boy, searching for any sign of fear, pain, or silent messages. The boy's eyes flick to Rook and then drop, as if the weight of the animal's attention is too much to bear. In the small, glass-walled screening room, Cassidy positions herself so she can see both the door and the 2 newcomers. The boy huddles into the farthest corner, eyes glued to the floor. The man leans against the wall, trying to project ease, but betraying a restless energy in the way his fingers drum on his ticket. Cassidy radios for a supervisor, her mind racing through protocols. Rook circles the room, not quite pacing, but never still, his attention always returning to the boy. The boy's breathing is shallow, hands pressed flat against his knees. Cassidy kneels down so she's level with him, her voice gentle. "What's your name?" No answer, just a quick shake of the head. She tries again, softer. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" Rook presses his nose against the boy's backpack, nostrils quivering. Cassidy doesn't miss the way the man's fists clench. She meets his eyes, and for a split second the mask slips. There's a flicker of annoyance, almost anger. Cassidy signals one of her backup officers to stand closer to the man. "We'll need to verify your identities." This shouldn't take long. The man's smile is back, but his eyes are cold. "I have a tight connection. We can't be late." Cassidy doesn't budge. The tension in the room has a taste. Metallic, sharp, electrified by unsaid words. Rook stands perfectly still beside the boy, lowering his head until the two are eye to eye. The boy's lip trembles, but he doesn't look away. Cassidy feels her heart pounding. She's been here before, not exactly like this, but in those moments when instinct screams louder than the checklist, she wonders, not for the first time, if she's about to make a mistake she can't undo. Rook gives a single low snort, almost like a warning. Cassidy straightens, scanning the man's posture. The boy flinches, the air charged with silent tension. The PA announces another flight boarding at gate D11. Cassidy signals the officers. "We'll need to speak with you privately. Please, this way." The man hesitates, weighing his options, then shrugs with exaggerated patience. As Cassidy ushers them toward the adjoining interview suite, she glances back at Rook, whose eyes remain locked on the boys. The story unfolding in this glass room is invisible to the morning rush just outside, but to Cassidy and Rook, it's impossible to ignore. Instinct has forced them off script into a place where the stakes are higher than most people will ever know. And as the door closes behind them, Cassidy's gut tells her this morning is about to change everything. Cassidy stands in the secondary screening room, a thin veneer of calm stretched across her features, while her mind spins with every detail Rook had signaled. She can feel the faint tremor of adrenaline in her hands, a warning as old as her career, one that never lies even when everything else seems muddled. Rook stands like a statue between the boy and the man, ears pinned back, eyes watchful. The air in the room grows heavy as the silence lingers. Cassidy has seen canines used for airport detection plenty of times. Their barks and nose work almost second nature in these sterile hallways. But a horse, especially Rook, brings a presence that nobody really knows how to interpret, and right now, he's speaking louder than words. Cassidy glances at the boy again, noting how he withdraws whenever the man shifts or speaks, how he recoils just slightly at quick movements, how his gaze never settles anywhere for long, especially not on the man who claims to be his father. The man stands tall, arms crossed, tapping one foot with growing impatience. "Is this really necessary? You're scaring my son." His voice tries for warmth, but Cassidy catches the strain underneath. "This will just take a moment, sir. Standard procedure." Cassidy's tone is measured, giving nothing away. She nods to her backup, Officer Torres, to start the standard questions, and Torres does so smoothly, but Cassidy's attention is locked onto Rook. The horse snorts, a deep, rolling sound, and starts to circle the pair, nostrils wide, his massive head lowering to sniff at the boy's small backpack. Cassidy's eyes flick to the bag, then to the boy's hands, pale and tense, gripping the straps as if it's a lifeline. The man shoots a glare at Cassidy. "Do you need my son to empty his things too?" The boy looks up at Cassidy, then at Rook, and for a fleeting instant, Cassidy sees a spark. Maybe hope, maybe desperation. Cassidy kneels, her badge glinting in the overhead light. She softens her expression, voice gentle but steady. "Hey, buddy. Can you tell me your name?" The boy bites his lip, shaking his head, eyes darting between Cassidy and the horse. Cassidy tries a different approach. "Rook here. He's got a knack for sniffing out when something's not right." "You like horses?" The boy hesitates, then nods almost imperceptibly. The man cuts in quickly. He's shy, doesn't like strangers. Cassidy nods as if conceding, but inside she catalogs every interruption, every subtle power play. Rook stops in front of the boy's bag, head hovering inches from it, ears laid flat. Cassidy recognizes the posture from training. This isn't aggression. This is protection. Something deep in the animal's bones telling him to shield the vulnerable. She stands and faces the man, her voice taking on a firmer edge. "We need to run a check on your documents. If you could both hand over your passports, please." The man sighs, digging into his inner coat pocket and producing 2 pristine passports, snapping them open to the photo pages with a crisp flick. Cassidy takes them, examining the images, comparing them to the faces before her. She sees the boy's hands trembling slightly. The photo in his passport looks older, the eyes brighter, the smile real. Now, the boy's face is guarded, blank. She passes the documents to Officer Torres, who leaves to verify them. As Torres exits, the man leans in, voice low. "You're making a mistake. My son gets nervous. We have a funeral to attend." Cassidy nods, but holds his gaze. "We'll be as quick as possible. Thank you for your patience." She returns her attention to Rook, who's still blocking the boy's bag, occasionally flicking his tail but never taking his eyes off the child. Cassidy's mind races through possibilities. Child custody dispute? Smuggling? Something worse? She tries to remember every training session, every story she's heard about gut feelings turning into life-saving instincts. Out in the hall, Torres gives the signal that he's run into something irregular. Cassidy's heart rate kicks up. She turns back to the man. "I'll need you both to remain here while we finish up." The man stiffens, irritation flickering in his eyes. Cassidy can almost feel the storm building, the sense that something is about to break. Rook steps closer to the boy, and Cassidy sees the child relax a fraction. The boy's hands loosen their death grip on the straps, one drifting up to touch Rook's mane. Cassidy sees this and understands. Sometimes children trust animals faster than adults, and sometimes animals know what adults try to hide. Cassidy kneels again, lowering her voice so only the boy can hear. "If there's anything you want to say, now's a good time. You're safe here. Rook will stay with you." The boy blinks up at her, big eyes wet with unshed tears. The man starts pacing, jaw clenched, glancing at his watch. Cassidy keeps a careful eye on his every movement, ready for anything. She thinks about all those times in the past when Connie and teams picked up on something no human could see, how she'd always trusted their instincts over paperwork. She wonders if this is just like that, or if Rook has sensed something even deeper, a fear, a silent plea for help. Rook nudges the boy, who finally looks up at Cassidy, almost ready to say something, then shrinks back when the man's shadow looms over him. Cassidy feels the knot in her gut tighten. She straightens, moving to stand between the man and the boy. "Sir, please stay by the wall." The man throws up his hands, mock exasperated. "This is ridiculous. We're going to miss our flight." Cassidy glances at the clock, then at Torres re-entering the room, face carefully blank. She knows something's up, but no one's said it out loud yet. Cassidy takes a deep breath. She leans down one last time to the boy. "You don't have to be afraid. Rook's got you." The boy meets her eyes, finally holding her gaze. Rook's presence is like a force field, unmoving, unwavering, silent but strong. Cassidy realizes this isn't just about rules or checklists. It's about reading between the lines, about trusting the instincts of a horse who's never let her down. The silence in the room crackles. Cassidy knows the next move will change everything. She glances at Rook and sees the answer written clear as day in the animal's eyes. Something is wrong, and it's time to act. The air inside the private interview suite feels different, closer, sharper, a world away from the open terminal just beyond the door. Cassidy ushers the man and boy inside, the sense of urgency humming in her chest. Rook waits at the threshold, the security team having reluctantly allowed him entry under Cassidy's insistent authority. His presence is a silent promise to the boy and a warning to anyone who might think about running. Officer Torres enters next, quietly informing Cassidy that a French interpreter is on their way, just as the passports are confirmed suspicious. One detail doesn't match the airline's manifest, a red flag in bold letters. Cassidy thanks him and positions herself near the window, keeping both man and boy in view. The boy sits at the edge of a metal chair, feet not touching the floor, hands balled into nervous fists on his lap. The man hovers behind him, that wide, forced smile never slipping. But Cassidy reads impatience and a rising anger in the set of his jaw. Rook stands just inside the door, tail still, black eyes locked on the boy with a focus that makes even Cassidy uneasy. There's a stretch of silence as everyone waits. Cassidy uses the time to study the boy, how he flinches at the scrape of a chair leg, how he keeps sneaking glances at the door as if weighing the distance to freedom. It's the posture of a child who has learned not to trust the adults around him. Cassidy knows the signs. She's seen it in shelters, in foster intake rooms, and once, heartbreakingly, in her own family. She kneels beside the boy, making herself small, non-threatening, voice pitched, soft and low. "We're going to bring in someone who speaks your language." okay? You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you. The boy nods. Just barely, but his lips stay tightly sealed. The man cuts in, voice tight and cold now. My son's tired. We'd appreciate if you could speed this up. Cassidy gives him a look that says she's in control now, then glances at Rook, who paws the tile once and resumes his vigil. The interpreter arrives. Marie, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle tone. She sits across from the boy, offers a smile, and speaks softly in French. The boy's shoulders tense, but after a moment he nods, and Marie repeats Cassidy's reassurance. He is safe, and nobody here will let anything bad happen. Marie gently asks his name. The boy whispers it, barely audible. Marie leans closer. Je m'appelle Leo, the boy says, voice quivering. Cassidy leans forward. What did he say? Marie answers quietly. His name is Leo. The man stiffens behind them, fists clenching. Marie continues, asking Leo where he's from. Leo's answer is so soft Marie must coax him, but eventually, the boy's trembling voice breaks through the heavy silence. Il n'est pas mon père. He is not my father. The words ripple through the room like a gunshot. Cassidy feels her blood freeze. She catches the man's reaction, a flash of something dark and furious, before he recovers, scowling at Marie. He's confused. It's been a stressful morning. But Cassidy's mind is already racing, heart pounding, all doubts swept aside. She signals to Officer Torres, who steps quietly to the door and radios for immediate backup. Marie continues gently, asking Leo if he knows where he is or where he was going. The boy shakes his head. Cassidy's hands shake with contained fury and relief. Rook, sensing the spike in energy, shifts his weight, standing firm between Leo and the man who now looks cornered, the predator exposed. Cassidy turns to the man, voice hard. Sir, we need you to stand up and step away from the boy. The man hesitates, then bristles. On what grounds? Cassidy answers flatly. For the boy's safety. Please cooperate. The man's mask slips entirely, anger blazing in his eyes, but the presence of 3 security officers and Rook leaves him little room. He stands, arms raised, but his eyes never leave Leo. You people are making a mistake. Cassidy ignores him, kneeling beside Leo, her tone gentle again. Leo, you're okay. We're going to help you. Leo finally looks up at Cassidy, wide-eyed, and then over to Rook, whose massive head lowers until their foreheads nearly touch. Cassidy watches as the boy lets out a shuddering breath, his first real breath since stepping foot in the airport. It's as if the horse's silent strength shields him from all the chaos and shouting. Officers lead the man out, reading him his rights in both English and French. The man sputters curses, his voice fading as the door closes behind him. The room is quiet now, broken only by the faint static of Cassidy's radio and Leo's shaky breaths. Cassidy sits on the floor next to Leo, Rook beside them, forming a protective half-circle. Marie, the interpreter, offers the boy water, which he accepts with trembling hands. The boy doesn't speak again for several long minutes. Cassidy's mind churns with details, the mismatched passports, Rook's relentless alert, the boy's flinching, his final whispered confession. She thinks about how close Leo had come to vanishing into the crowd. One more statistic, one more missing child. Cassidy squeezes her eyes shut, steadying herself. There will be paperwork, hours of interviews, layers of trauma to untangle. But right now, all that matters is this room, the battered child, and the black horse whose instincts saved a life. Marie gently explains to Leo that the man will not be coming back, that police and child welfare will help him now. Leo nods, tears finally spilling over. Cassidy gives him a small, tired smile, feeling her own eyes sting. She doesn't try to touch him. She's seen how even well-meaning contact can feel overwhelming to children like this. Instead, she lets Rook fill the space between them, a steady anchor. The boy's fingers reach out, brush Rook's mane, and finally he speaks. Just one more word in a trembling French whisper. Merci. Thank you. Cassidy, the interpreter, and Rook stay with Leo until the next team arrives. But as she finally steps outside, Cassidy can't shake the feeling that today, for once, instinct was enough. That sometimes a horse can see what even a seasoned officer cannot, and a single word whispered in a language of fear and hope can turn the tide. And she knows, deep down, this is only the beginning of the unraveling. The room is empty now, except for Cassidy, Marie, and Rook. Leo has been gently led away by a social worker, still clutching a bottle of water and glancing back over his shoulder at the horse that saved him. Cassidy stands by the window, the faint blue morning light pooling at her boots, her reflection half visible in the glass. She breathes deeply, her body exhausted but her mind spinning. Rook stands nearby, watching the hallway, every muscle still taut as if he's waiting for another threat to appear. Cassidy turns, stroking his mane, whispering softly, "You did good, boy. You did real good." But she can't let herself relax. Not yet. Not when her gut still churns with adrenaline and her head is buzzing with questions she can't shake. There's an energy in the air now, a sense that something much larger than one man and one frightened child is about to surface. Within minutes, the airport's command center is in motion. Security officers, police, and even federal agents converge on the small suite, the tone in their voices shifting from routine to urgent as the story spreads. A boy taken across borders, a man with counterfeit documents, a horse's unexplainable alert. Cassidy is pulled into a flurry of questions. She answers them all: how Rook signaled, why she trusted him, what she saw in Leo's eyes. She repeats her description of the man's strange smile, the boy's terrified silence, and the moment in the whisper room when the truth finally surfaced. As she speaks, texts arrive and begin pouring over the confiscated cell phones, scanning for anything that doesn't match a normal travel itinerary. Cassidy watches from the corner as they crack the lock screen on the man's phone and begin to comb through his messages. In a matter of minutes, one agent stands up, eyes wide, and calls the others over. "You need to see this," he says. On the phone is a string of encrypted messages, screenshots of passports, photos of children, some crying, some sleeping, some faces blurred as if taken in a rush. There are lists of airport codes, initials, dates, and transfer instructions. The entire operation is far bigger and more organized than anyone suspected. Cassidy's stomach drops as she realizes just how close Leo came to vanishing without a trace. It's not just a single abduction. This is a network, spanning cities and countries, operating under the noses of hundreds of security officers, using forged identities and carefully planned travel routes. She feels sick, thinking about all the flights that left before Rook's whinny cut through the morning calm. The agents bring Leo in, now with a trained trauma counselor and 2 Interpol officers. His name, Leo Bouchard, pings immediately in the Interpol system. His face matches a missing child alert filed weeks ago by his mother in Lyon, France. Cassidy feels her throat tighten as she listens to the agent read off the report. Leo was last seen outside his school. The family was told he'd run away, but his mother insisted he'd never leave without saying goodbye to his horse, his best friend. That detail, his bond with animals, suddenly makes Rook's connection to the boy feel like something more than chance. Cassidy wonders for a moment if some instinct in Rook recognized a kindred spirit. It's a thought that stirs both awe and grief. Interpol floods the system with updates, and suddenly every camera feed, every ticket manifest, every suspicious passenger list is under review. They begin to connect the dots. Leo was taken by a ring known for using airports as their hunting ground, luring or abducting vulnerable children and shuffling them across borders before authorities can even react. The messages on the phone mention other children, other cities. An entire web of pain hidden in plain sight. Cassidy watches as Rook stands quietly beside Leo, who sits in the corner, knees drawn to his chest. The counselor asks him gentle questions, and slowly Leo begins to answer. He tells them how the man took him from his school, promising he'd see his mother soon, but every promise faded into another airport, another hotel room, another lie. He says he tried to run once, but the man threatened him. Cassidy feels anger rise in her chest, a hot, pulsing sense of injustice that makes her fists clench. She wants to storm out, to hunt down every person who ever hurt a child, but she knows her place now is beside Rook, holding the line as the investigation builds. The federal agents are quick and ruthless, seizing every electronic device, pulling flight manifests, cross-referencing everything with missing child reports. Rook, meanwhile, becomes the quiet center of it all, his steady presence grounding Cassidy whenever the chaos threatens to overwhelm her. She finds herself recalling every training session, every story she ever doubted about horses reading people's hearts. Rook, with no formal training for this kind of detection, had simply known. His alert wasn't written in any manual, but it was the difference between a lost child and a headline that would have haunted Cassidy for years. As the day stretches on, Cassidy begins to feel the weight of what just happened. She questions her own faith in the equine program. She remembers every skeptical remark. Horses at an airport, really. And feels the urge to defend Rook against all of them. He didn't just alert her to danger, he changed the entire course of the investigation. And as the network is uncovered, as other children are identified and recovered, as Leo's mother is finally reached and a tearful reunion is arranged, Cassidy realizes that Rook's unexplained alert will go down as the turning point. For every formality in the system, for every procedural step, there are moments when only intuition can crack the case open. Cassidy finds herself rethinking everything she believed about instinct. She wonders if it's possible to teach what Rook knows, or if some beings, animal and human alike, are born with a gift for finding the lost. As the sun slips lower and the terminal empties, Cassidy walks Rook down the quiet corridor, the echo of his hooves a gentle reminder that some heroes don't need badges or words. She pauses at gate D11, staring at the space where it all began, and knows she'll never see that gate the same way again. The airport may forget, but Cassidy and Rook will remember, and so will every child who ever found hope in the eyes of an unlikely rescuer. The airport felt impossibly quiet as dusk began to fall. Cassidy Bell stood by the service paddock, one hand resting against the warmth of Rook's shoulder, the other clutching her phone as it buzzed endlessly with calls she let go to voicemail. All the adrenaline, the shouts, the urgent radio traffic from earlier had faded, leaving a thick, haunting silence in its place. The day's chaos echoed only in Cassidy's bones now, a pounding exhaustion that left her restless, unable to stop replaying every moment in her mind. She watched the sky darken beyond the terminal's glass walls, streaked in violet and gold, and found herself feeling more alone than she had in years. Rook grazed quietly on the patch of grass beside her, the city's noise a distant hum, his shadow stretching long in the amber light. Cassidy wanted to believe that everything had ended as well as it could have. The man was in custody, Leo was safe, Interpol was already building a larger case that might save dozens more children like him. But she couldn't shake the aftertaste of doubt and guilt that she'd hesitated for even a second before following Rook's lead, guilt that she'd once rolled her eyes at the idea of horses as airport guardians, and guilt, most of all, that there had nearly been a different outcome. She let out a shaky breath and crouched down beside Rook, running her hand along the soft fur between his ears. "You saved him, you know," she murmured. Rook didn't respond. He simply pressed his broad head into Cassidy's chest, standing so still she could feel the thrum of his heartbeat through his forehead. Cassidy closed her eyes, letting herself be anchored by the animal's silent strength. As she sat there, lost in thought, footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. She turned to see Leo approaching, hand in hand with a woman from Child Protective Services. His face was pale, still streaked with dried tears, but his eyes were brighter now, a little less haunted, a little more alive. The woman nodded at Cassidy. He wanted to say goodbye before heading to the safe house. He keeps asking for the horse with the black eyes. Cassidy felt something twist inside her, an ache that was equal parts relief and sorrow. She nodded gently, rising to her feet and motioning Leo over. Rook didn't move, but his ears flicked toward the boy, sensing the familiar footsteps, the hesitant hope. Leo let go of the social worker's hand and took a trembling step closer, then another. Cassidy didn't speak. She knew the power of silence for kids like him. Leo stopped in front of Rook, so small he barely reached the horse's chest, and just looked up, eyes shining in the twilight. There was a long pause where neither moved, and Cassidy held her breath, wondering if the spell would break. Then Leo reached out a hand, slow, deliberate, cautious like an animal in the wild. Rook lowered his head, the black eyes soft, and allowed the boy to touch his muzzle. For a long, sacred moment, the two simply stood together, boy and horse, breathing in sync. Cassidy watched, heart aching, as Leo rested his cheek against Rook's nose. She saw the way the tension in the boy's shoulders melted, how his breath came easier, steadier. He whispered something in French, and Rook flicked an ear as if he understood every word. Cassidy couldn't catch it all, but she heard the words, merci and ami. Thank you, friend. The social worker snapped a quiet photo, understanding this was more than a goodbye. It was a lifeline. Cassidy swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She remembered her own first encounter with Rook, how she'd doubted him, how she'd privately scoffed at the equine therapy pilot the airport administrators had floated, more PR stunt than real security, she'd said at the time. But Rook had proved her wrong, again and again, in small ways she hadn't noticed until now. Today, he had been more than a detector. He had been a bridge, and Cassidy found herself, for the first time, feeling like a believer. As dusk faded to night, Leo finally stepped back. The social worker touched his shoulder. "We should go, sweetheart. You'll see him again soon." Leo nodded, giving Rook one last look, something deep and wordless passing between them. Cassidy stepped in, kneeling to his level. "You're brave. You know that?" Leo didn't answer, but he didn't need to. He offered Cassidy a fleeting, shy smile before letting the social worker lead him away. Cassidy watched them disappear down the path, her heart heavy and light all at once. When she turned back, Rook was watching her, those black eyes endless and understanding. "Guess we're not just window dressing anymore, huh?" she whispered, her voice cracking with something close to gratitude and awe. Rook nickered softly, as if in agreement. That night, Cassidy couldn't sleep. She walked Rook around the paddock under the floodlights, her mind a storm of emotions, guilt for her earlier skepticism, gratitude for what Rook had done, so row for every child who never got a second chance, and hope for the ones who still might. She found herself thinking about the future, about the next time Rook would alert, about the next child who might need saving, and she promised herself, and Rook, that she would never again doubt what a horse or a gut feeling could accomplish. As the city slipped into darkness and the airport slowed to a hush, Cassidy leaned against Rook's neck, her silent tears soaking into his mane. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to the horse, the universe, or the boy she had almost lost. Maybe it was all of them. Maybe it was herself, finally letting go of old fears and stepping into something new, something bigger than rules and checklists and doubts. As Rook stood steady beneath the stars, Cassidy realized that sometimes, in a world of noise and confusion, the quiet bond between a child and a horse was enough to bring hope roaring back, bright and unstoppable, into the night. The following afternoon brought a gentler light and a sense of something unfinished hanging in the air. Cassidy spent her morning drifting through briefings, filling out incident reports, and fielding calls from officials whose voices bled with skepticism and wonder in equal measure. She answered every question about Rook's behavior and the events at Gate D11, but her mind was somewhere else, always circling back to Leo and the small miracle that had unfolded under the airport's indifferent gaze. By midday, she escaped the clatter of radios and questions, leading Rook down the service path toward the grassy field beyond the employee parking lot, a place tucked between concrete and runway where the world slowed down and where children from school groups sometimes came to visit the airport's oddest officer. Today, Cassidy walked alone, except for the echo of hooves and the dull thud of her own heartbeat. Rook moved beside her, head low, every movement relaxed, but his eyes searching. He was waiting too, Cassidy realized, for the reunion they'd both promised but didn't know how to arrange. She paused at the edge of the clearing, where the wind rustled the clover and the distant rumble of jets sounded like thunder behind glass. It was then that she saw Leo, standing quietly with his caseworker, hands folded at his chest, eyes fixed on the grass at his feet. The boy looked smaller than she remembered, all tension and hesitation, as if each step toward this patch of green was heavier than the last. His caseworker gave Cassidy a soft nod. "He's barely spoken all morning. He asked if he could see the horse before the next interview." Cassidy nodded in return, unsure if words would do anything but break the spell. She unclipped Rook's lead and let the horse step forward, slow and careful, as if he too sensed the importance of this moment. The boy's gaze rose. The sunlight hit Rook's black coat, making him almost mythical, sleek, powerful, but utterly gentle as he approached. For a moment, nothing moved. Cassidy found herself holding her breath as Leo inched closer, his hands now trembling at his sides. He stopped just out of reach, searching Rook's eyes, as if waiting for some sign of permission. Rook lowered his head until his muzzle hovered just above Leo's shoulder. Cassidy could see the boy's chest rise and fall in quick, shallow breaths. Then, without a word, Leo extended a trembling hand and placed it gently on Rook's face, his palm flat against warm fur. For several long seconds, they both stood perfectly still. The only sound was the wind whispering through the grass and the far-off drone of airplanes taking flight. Cassidy watched, her own throat tight, as the boy closed his eyes, tears tracking silently down his cheeks. Rook never moved, never twitched, simply stood rooted as if all the world's pain and fear could pass into him through the gentle touch of one frightened child. Leo's caseworker, standing at a respectful distance, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Cassidy felt tears sting her own. This was not the kind of healing that could be prescribed or measured in reports. This was something quieter, deeper, a restoration of trust that had nothing to do with words. Leo spoke first, his voice so soft it was almost lost in the breeze. "He remembers me." Cassidy swallowed hard, smiling. "I think he remembers everyone he helps." The boy pressed his cheek against Rook's neck, breathing deep, steadying himself, as if to gather strength from the horse's silent courage. Cassidy stayed back, giving them space. Minutes passed, 10, 15, maybe more, while Leo stroked Rook's mane, murmuring in French, sharing secrets Cassidy could never understand. But she saw the change blooming across the boy's features, a loosening of his jaw, a relaxation of his shoulders, the way his eyes began to roam the field instead of searching for exits. When Leo finally looked up, his gaze found Cassidy, searching her face for some unspoken answer. She offered only a gentle nod, the kind reserved for sacred things. The caseworker stepped forward, crouching to Leo's level. "Are you ready to go?" The boy hesitated, then glanced at Rook. With a last gentle hug, he let his fingers linger on the horse's mane, as if trying to take some of the calm and strength with him. He nodded, turning away. But as he reached Cassidy, he paused and looked up. "Will he remember me?" Cassidy bent down, eyes level with his. "Rook doesn't forget. You're part of his story now." Leo smiled, a small, tentative thing, but a smile nonetheless. The caseworker led him away, their figures shrinking against the sunlit grass, until only Cassidy and Rook remained. The world seemed hushed, as if even the airport itself was holding its breath, bearing witness to something pure. Cassidy approached Rook, scratching his neck. "You did good, big guy." She realized with a jolt of humility how little she understood about what truly mattered in this job. For ours, she'd measured success in arrests, seized contraband, completed reports. Now she saw the value in silent victories, in the lives changed by a horse who needed no badge and asked no reward. She walked Rook back to the stable, heart lighter than it had been in months. The memory of Leo's touch, the silent bond that needed no translation, stayed with her long after the sun dipped behind the control tower. That evening, Cassidy updated the director of airport security, describing the meeting between Leo and Rook. The director listened, then asked quietly, "Did it help him?" Cassidy paused, thinking of the tears, the smile, the peace. "I think it saved him," she said. Alone with Rook in the stable's twilight, Cassidy wondered how many more children could be helped if only given the chance. If only someone trusted the wordless wisdom of a gentle animal and a wounded child. She let herself believe, for the first time in a long while, that hope could grow in places nobody expected. Between the runways and the fields, between one heart and another, silent and strong as the bond they'd all forged that day. After the days of tension and relief, the airport seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm, people coming and going, announcements echoing from overhead speakers, the constant murmur of a place that never truly sleeps. Cassidy returned to her regular shifts, but everything felt a little different now. Her colleagues, some of whom had teased her about the pony patrol in the past, now greeted Rook with respect, even awe. Yet, Cassidy's mind was restless. She found herself turning over questions she'd never considered before. How had Rook known? Was it training, luck, or something deeper? Was there more to his story than any of them realized? On a quiet morning, she decided she needed answers, not for her report, but for herself. So, after checking in with the stable team and making sure Rook was comfortable, she made her way to the records office, tucked behind a row of TSA cubicles, badge clipped to her belt, and a notebook in hand. Inside, she greeted Sharon, the clerk, who always seemed to know every secret the airport held. "I'm looking for Rook's service file," Cassidy said. Sharon gave her a quizzical glance, then smiled. "Didn't peg you for sentimental." "Just curious," Cassidy replied, though they both knew it was more than that. Sharon typed Rook's identification number into the ancient computer, and after a few moments, she slid a thin manila folder across the counter. "Not much in there," she said. "He was a rescue. Came in through that experimental program a few years ago. Most people thought it was a joke." Cassidy nodded, thanked her, and carried the file to a corner table where the sun slanted through dusty blinds. She opened it, expecting to find generic notes: age, breed, maybe a few lines on temperament. But as she began to read, a different story emerged, and she soon realized how little she knew about the partner who had changed everything at Gate D11. The notes were sparse, mostly filled in by trainers who'd cycled through the airport's animal support unit. Rook, a gelding, had been rescued from a neglect case upstate. His records showed he'd arrived skittish, stubborn, and fiercely protective of other horses, even blocking access to the weaker ones if humans got too close. Cassidy scanned the remarks. "Displays barrier behaviors. Unusual alertness around unfamiliar people." She recognized the language. Phrases that suggested more than simple instinct, hinting at something almost intentional. Another entry, from a training officer named Collins, jumped out at her. "Unresponsive to standard commands. Shows preference for leading children and standing between handlers and strangers. Startled easily by men in dark clothing." There were a handful of incident logs, none major, but all with a common thread. Rook stepping between handlers and airport visitors during high-stress situations, particularly when the visitors appeared agitated or upset. Cassidy's heart thudded as she remembered the scene with Leo. The same posture, the same unwavering protection. It struck her that none of this was part of Rook's formal training. He'd been selected for his calm under pressure and his sensitivity, but the behaviors that made him a hero weren't in the manual. They were in his memory. She flipped to a section marked Observations. One note, scrawled in a hurried hand, read, "Horse appears to anticipate emotional distress in others. Intervenes with barrier posturing, no aggression, only blocks access." Cassidy set the file down, staring out the window. Was it possible that Rook's own difficult history, neglect, fear, the instinct to protect weaker herd members, had made him uniquely sensitive to the pain and fear of children like Leo? She realized that, unlike dogs, horses never fully forget. Their memories of kindness and cruelty, of threat and comfort, last a lifetime. Rook, in his own way, was always looking for those who needed help, maybe because once he'd needed it himself. That thought hit Cassidy harder than she expected. She wondered how many people had written off horses as simple, even dumb creatures, never understanding how complex and deep their emotions could run. She closed the folder, heart heavy and grateful at once. The official logs wouldn't mention instinct, empathy, or a past that shaped a hero, but Cassidy knew what she'd seen. She stood, tucking the folder under her arm, and made her way back to the paddock, where Rook grazed in the morning light. She leaned on the fence, watching him, reflecting on all the little moments that had led to this. Her own doubts, the skepticism of her colleagues, the laughter from airport managers who once threatened to pull funding for the program. And now, here she was, the biggest believer in all. Cassidy reached over the fence, scratching Rook's nose. "You ever wish you could talk, big guy?" Rook just flicked his ears and snorted, as if to say everything important had already been said. That afternoon, Cassidy met with her supervisor, Rick Albayo requested that Rook's file be updated to include his actions at Gate D11 and advocated for the continuation and expansion of the equine unit. She cited the notes, the observations, the moments of protection. "He's more than a tool," she argued. "He's a partner, and he's got instincts you can't teach." Her supervisor listened, no longer skeptical, and agreed to share Rook's story at the next training session. Cassidy left the meeting feeling like she'd finally given Rook the recognition he deserved, not as a novelty, but as a fellow survivor, a teammate whose history had forged his greatest strengths. That evening, as the sun slipped low and airport lights began to flicker on, Cassidy returned to the paddock for one last visit. Rook trotted over to greet her, and as she stroked his neck, she whispered, "We're both a little broken, huh? Maybe that's what makes us strong." The horse stood quietly, nuzzling her sleeve, and Cassidy felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She realized that, sometimes, the best protectors are the ones who know what it means to be afraid, and choose, every day, to stand between danger and those who need hope most. As she walked away, Cassidy glanced back to see Rook watching her, silhouette framed in the golden light, a horse with a history, and now, a legacy that would outlast any file or report. The airport would move on, travelers would come and go, but Cassidy and Rook would remember every story, every rescue, every child who found safety and courage because of a black horse who never forgot. The invitation to speak at the National TSA conference arrived less than 2 weeks after the events at Gate D11, and at first Cassidy hesitated. She wasn't a public speaker. Her comfort was in routine, in quiet observation, in the wordless communication she shared with Rook, and on rare occasions with those who needed help most. But the email was insistent, her supervisor urging her to just tell the truth. The world, it seemed, was hungry for stories of hope in places no one expected to find it. Cassidy packed her best suit, cleaned her boots until they gleamed, and spent long evenings rehearsing what she might say. She worked in the paddock, practicing her words aloud, while Rook chewed thoughtfully on hay and eyed her with gentle patience. "People don't want a lecture," she murmured, rubbing Rook's neck. "They want to know what you did, how you did it, maybe even why." When the morning of the conference arrived, Cassidy led Rook up the ramp and into the waiting horse trailer, heart thudding in her chest. She had convinced the organizers that Rook was part of her story, and he'd be allowed on stage for the final segment. Unorthodox. But the world seemed to need a little more of the unexplainable these days. The conference hall was enormous, ceilings soaring above rows of government officials, security professionals, therapy experts, and, most importantly to Cassidy, survivors and advocates who knew firsthand the difference a moment's intuition could make. Backstage, Cassidy tried to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. She checked Rook's bridle for the 10th time and listened as speaker after speaker described the latest technology, the new protocols, the state-of-the-art surveillance measures that promised to make the world safer. But it was clear, in the hushed conversations and the nervous laughter that drifted through the curtains, that no one felt truly safe. Not when danger could slip by wearing a friendly smile and carrying the right documents. When Cassidy's turn came, she led Rook up the short ramp and onto the stage. A hush fell. People reached for their phones, snapping photos, murmuring to each other in surprise. Cassidy smiled nervously, gave Rook a reassuring pat, and stepped up to the podium. The lights were blinding, but she found her voice steady, rooted in memory, anchored by the horse at her side. "I'm Officer Cassidy Bell. This is Rook. Most of you know him as the airport horse. If you asked me a year ago, I would have told you he was a novelty, a PR stunt. But then something happened at Gate D11. She recounted the story, not just the facts, but the tension, the fear, the almost missed signals, the moment when Rook's instincts cut through all her doubts and forced her to act. She described Leo, without using his name, and the weight of trusting a partner who couldn't speak, but who saw things even she couldn't. The room was utterly still, every eye on Cassidy and Rook. She told them about the aftermath, the rescue, the evidence found, the realization that not all heroes wear badges or speak the language of law enforcement. "We talk a lot about protocols," Cassidy said, her voice growing softer. "But there's another language, the language of instinct, of empathy, of listening even when there are no words. Rook didn't need to say anything. Sometimes, a whinny says more than a badge ever could. She turned, inviting Rook to step forward. He did so calmly, his presence filling the stage, head held high, eyes steady. The effect was electric. People leaned forward, some with tears in their eyes, as if they too could sense the silent story this animal carried. Cassidy continued, "After that day, I realized we need more than technology. We need trust. We need to honor those moments when something feels off, even if we can't explain it. Rook's not a machine. He's not a tool. He's a living, breathing partner who saved a life when the checklist would have let it slip by." When she finished, the applause rolled over her like thunder, long, sustained, almost overwhelming. Cassidy blinked back tears, grateful that the message had landed. Backstage, she was swarmed by people wanting to meet Rook, to hear more, to tell their own stories of near misses and narrow escapes. The conference organizers asked if they could use Rook as a case study for future training. Therapy experts wanted to observe him with traumatized children. News outlets clamored for interviews, but Cassidy turned them down. This wasn't about her, she insisted, but about what was possible when you let trust and instinct lead. That evening, Cassidy sat in the quiet paddock at the conference center, Rook nuzzling her shoulder as the sunset bled gold through the trees. For a long time, she didn't speak, just listened to the wind and the distant hum of cars. She thought about all the children out there who would never know Rook's name, who would never see the black horse standing watch at an airport gate, but who might on a day be saved because someone, somewhere, listened to their instincts. The next day, Cassidy returned to the airport. Word of her speech had already preceded her. Colleagues offered shy congratulations, and supervisors asked for her notes. But Cassidy knew the real lesson wasn't in her words, but in the way Rook stood on that stage, unflinching, silent, but so present that no one could look away. As she brushed Rook down in the stables, she whispered, "We did good, didn't we?" Rook flicked his ears, pressed his nose against her hand, and Cassidy smiled. It wasn't the speech or the ovation that mattered. It was the bond, unbreakable, wordless, forged in crisis and trust. The kind of bond that would outlast even the longest applause. And as the days slipped by, and the world went back to business as usual, Cassidy carried that moment with her. The knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the quietest voices speak the loudest of all. In the months that followed the conference, the story of Rook and Cassidy, of the black horse at Gate D11, spread quietly but steadily, rippling out beyond the sterile halls of the airport and into newsrooms, classrooms, and therapy circles across the country. For Cassidy, life returned to its measured routines, but nothing felt quite the same. There was a new sense of possibility in the air, a gentle undercurrent of hope every time she walked Rook down the terminal concourse or paused in the paddock after sunset, listening to the hush settle over the city. Most noticeable was how the world around her began to change in response to Rook's story. The airport administrators, initially reluctant, had been swayed by the wave of public support and the undeniable impact of what had happened with Leo. Rook was granted a permanent role, not just as a patrol horse, but as the official figurehead of a new pilot program. The program's mission was simple: use horses, with their uncanny intuition and calming presence, to support both security and trauma detection at transportation hubs and public spaces. Cassidy helped design the pilot, building it around the very things that had saved Leo: patience, presence, and the courage to trust what cannot always be seen or measured. She recruited other handlers and partnered with animal behaviorists and child psychologists, determined to ensure the work went deeper than any PR campaign or fleeting headline. The heart of the new program was a grassy field on the airport's far edge, once overlooked and weedy, now fenced and blooming with wildflowers and hope. It became known as the Field of Trust, a place where officers, children, and even tired travelers could step out of the rush and spend a few minutes with Rook or one of the other horses. Word spread quickly among the social workers and counselors in the city. Soon, Cassidy was organizing regular visits for children recovering from trauma, some from missing persons cases, others from the foster care system, some simply struggling with the chaos and uncertainty of the world. At first, the kids arrived wary, clutching backpacks or clinging to a parent's hand, but the effect of the horses was almost immediate. Rook, in particular, would approach with a slow, steady confidence, offering his velvet muzzle and his silent, bottomless eyes. Cassidy never tired of watching the transformations. The children spoke more freely near the horses, sometimes laughing for the first time in months. They shared things they'd hidden even from their therapists: secrets, memories, nightmares, hopes. Sometimes they simply sat, leaning against Rook's shoulder, letting his quiet breath steady their own. Leo became a regular visitor. With the help of his caseworker, and eventually his mother, who traveled across the ocean to bring him home, Leo returned to the airport's field of trust each week. The first few visits were quiet. Leo kept close to Rook, whispering in French, tracing shapes in the horse's mane while Cassidy watched from a respectful distance. As time passed, the boy began to blossom. He started to speak more with his caseworker, his mother, and, eventually, with Cassidy herself. One afternoon, Leo waited for the other children to leave before approaching Cassidy and Rook at the edge of the field. The summer sun painted golden lines across the grass, and airport traffic thundered in the distance. Leo held a hand against Rook's side, then looked up at Cassidy, his English tentative but clear. "He didn't just find me," Leo said. "He kept me from disappearing." Cassidy knelt beside him, touched by the weight of his words. She looked at Rook, who flicked an ear as if he too understood. "You're safe now," she told Leo, "and you're always welcome here." The trust Leo had found, trust in Rook, in Cassidy, and finally in himself, became a quiet example for others. Word of his story, and those of other children, was woven into training sessions for new handlers. Cassidy learned that horses, with their uncanny memory and empathy, were not only guardians, but also teachers, showing both adults and children how to rebuild the fragile bridge of trust after it had been broken. The airport began to see fewer incidents of panic, fewer lost children, more reunions, and more quiet moments of relief in the field of trust. Cassidy noticed that her own view of the world had shifted as well. She was less quick to judge, more willing to wait for someone's story to emerge in its own time. She found herself listening more, not just with her ears but with her heart, like Rook had taught her. There were still hard days. Some children came with wounds too deep to be healed by any horse, and some stories ended in sorrow. But even then, Cassidy knew that every moment of safety and acceptance mattered. She kept a journal of the program's milestones. Every child who smiled again, every parent who called to say thank you, every officer who learned to trust our own instincts a little more. She recorded Leo's words, unable to forget the boy who had been lost and then found, not just by chance, but by the silent wisdom of an animal who refused to ignore what others missed. The program drew attention from other cities, and Cassidy found herself speaking at more conferences, always bringing Rook along, always emphasizing the lesson that had changed her own life. Sometimes, it is the ones who cannot speak who say the most. The field of trust became a symbol not just for healing, but for believing in the unseen, in the possibility that trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt in the simplest, most unexpected ways. Cassidy, standing in the golden light of another sunset, felt an unfamiliar peace. She realized that Rook had given her more than a moment of heroism. He had given her a new purpose and a new way to see the world, not as a place of constant danger, but as a field of possibility, where hope might take root in the silent space between a child's fear and a horse's steady gaze. And in that space, day after day, trust grew stronger and lives began again. If this story moved you, like and subscribe. Because not all heroes need voices to be heard. 1 year later, the airport had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Terminal D's morning shuffle was still the same. Families hugging goodbye, business travelers striding briskly with their heads down, the ever-present airport hum. Yet, beneath the surface, a quiet confidence ran through the place. At Gate D11, Cassidy stood beside Rook, now officially the most recognizable figure on the airport's staff roster. Travelers would stop to pat his neck, parents would kneel so their children could stroke his silky mane, and even the most hurried security officers slowed their pace when they passed the pair. Cassidy had grown used to the smiles, the shy thank yous, and the knowing nods from colleagues who once saw her as a stubborn idealist. What they didn't see was the transformation beneath her own calm exterior, a sense of purpose that felt as steady as Rook's step. Each morning, Cassidy found herself glancing at the arrivals board and then, almost instinctively, at Rook. He'd never lost his habit of pausing at gate D11, nose raised to the air, ears flicked forward as if listening for a memory that never faded. Sometimes, Cassidy wondered what he sensed in the thousands of footsteps, the overlapping lives that passed by each day. She was certain he hadn't forgotten, not the terror, not the hope, not the quiet moment when a frightened boy had found the courage to speak. Rook's whinny lingered in Cassidy's mind, echoing across every new day. In the field of trust, wildflowers had overtaken the fences, painting the grass in a riot of color. The program had grown. More horses, more handlers, more visits from children who needed a place where fear and suspicion could dissolve, if only for a while. Cassidy found herself acting as both mentor and student, learning from the children and their families as much as she taught new officers to listen to their own instincts. Some of her most treasured moments came at sunset, when the day's work was done and she would lead Rook into the field for one last walk. The sky, streaked in gold and purple, seemed impossibly wide, and Cassidy felt the weight of a year's worth of stories settle softly on her shoulders. She remembered the faces, Leo especially, who now returned with his mother, running across the grass with a laugh that rang like a promise. He still visited Rook every week, but now their time together was filled with joy instead of fear. He talked freely, telling stories in both French and English, and Cassidy marveled at how trust could grow and deepen with time, how a child once lost could become a symbol of resilience for everyone who heard his story. There were still challenges, of course. The trauma detection program was not a magic fix. Some children needed years of healing, and not every story ended with reunion or redemption. Cassidy had learned to accept this, to celebrate the small victories, and to mourn the losses without letting them harden her. She grew closer to the other handlers, who now saw the work as a calling, not a chore. Together, they built a community, a quiet resistance to the cynicism that sometimes crept in from the outside world. Each handler brought their own story, and Cassidy realized that every bond between a horse and a child was unique, unpredictable, and ultimately unbreakable. The airport administration, once reluctant, now championed the field of trust as a model for airports and public spaces everywhere. Cassidy helped design training modules, spoke at conferences, and, at Rook's insistence, or so she joked, always included live demonstrations of the language without words that changed lives. Rook had become a legend, his story told in magazines, news specials, and training seminars. But for Cassidy, the truest measure of his legacy was the ripple effect she saw in the eyes of children who entered the field, afraid and left with hope. One morning, as Cassidy walked her usual route with Rook, a woman approached at gate D11, a familiar face, older now, her hair streaked with silver. She held the hand of a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8. Cassidy's heart caught in her throat when the woman smiled. "Officer Bell," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You helped my son last year. He's at home now, safe, healing. We wanted to come back and say thank you." The little girl, Leo's younger sister, reached out and touched Rook's nose. Rook bent his head, letting her fingers explore his fur. Cassidy felt her eyes sting, her voice catching. "Thank you for letting us know he's okay." The woman squeezed her hand. "You changed everything for us. He still talks about you and Rook, about how you both listened when no one else could." As they left, Cassidy knelt beside Rook, running her hand along his neck. "You remember them, don't you?" she whispered. Rook nickered softly, a sound so low and gentle that Cassidy felt it in her bones. She knew, in that moment, that this was the real heart of their work. Not the awards or the headlines, but the enduring connection between memory and kindness, between courage and trust. The whinny that lingered was not just Rook's, but her own, a call to listen, to believe, to act. The months kept rolling by, the world with all its chaos and noise pressed in at the airport gates. But every day, Cassidy and Rook walked their route, greeting old friends and strangers alike, pausing a little longer at gate D11, where it all began. Sometimes travelers would wave. Some would thank him quietly. Some would just watch in silent wonder as the black horse made his rounds. Children with tired parents reached out with small, hopeful hands. And Cassidy always made time for them, letting them feel the warmth of Rook's presence, letting them know, even if only for a few moments, that the world could still be gentle. As autumn gave way to winter, Cassidy found herself reflecting more and more on the lessons of that first day. She understood now that heroism was not a moment but a practice, a decision made daily to notice, to care, to risk being wrong in order to do what felt right. She watched as Rook continued to pause at gate D11 every morning, his body still, his eyes focused as if he saw a shadow that no one else could. Cassidy smiled, warmed by the knowledge that he remembered, and that as long as they kept walking together, others would remember too. And so, life moved on, marked not by fanfare, but by small, meaningful gestures, by the comfort found in a horse's whinny, by the courage to trust instinct, by the hope that lingers in the quietest corners of an airport gate. Cassidy understood, at last, that not all heroes need voices to be heard. Some are remembered by their actions, by their steadfast loyalty, by the way they turn the ordinary into the extraordinary, just by showing up, day after day. And as Rook's silhouette stood proud against the early light, Cassidy knew that his story, their story, would linger long after the echoes faded, a quiet, persistent reminder that hope and trust can change the world, one life at a time.